I saw a Chamber of Commerce report recently that said if you took every unemployed person in the United States right now and you put them in a job, there would still be 5 million empty jobs tomorrow. There just aren't enough people to do all of the jobs that we have in our economy. And the biggest shortages, Jill, I know you know this, are going to be in leisure and hospitality, management positions, labor positions, education, and healthcare. Yeah. And so I've been telling leaders across the country, we need to embrace a mindset shift. It's not that nobody wants to work, it's that nobody wants to work for you. If they can't afford to, if the circumstances aren't right. The mindset shift we have to embrace is not that there's a staffing shortage, it's that there's a great job shortage. The employers who are providing great jobs aren't struggling to fill those positions.
Welcome to Medical Money Matters, the podcast where you can find experts, answers, and resources so that you can achieve mastery over the financial and business aspects of your practice. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Jill Arena. I began my career in accounting and finance, and I have more than 30 years of experience running medical groups. I own and operate a national healthcare consulting and revenue cycle company, and I am the author of Physician Heal Thy Financial Self. In 2020, I co-founded the Physician Leadership Project, and my passion is to increase financial and business literacy for physicians. Good morning, everyone. I am joined today by Joe Mull, who is the author of 3 books, including No More Team Drama and forthcoming Employalty, How to Ignite Commitment and Keep Top Talent in the New Age of Work. And that book, I am very excited to get my copy. It is due out next month in May, available on Amazon now. Joe is also the founder of the Boss Better Leadership Academy, and he hosts a very popular Boss Better Now podcast. And that one was recently named by SHRM as a can't-miss show for leaders, right next to podcasts from Brene Brown and Harvard Business Review. So Joe is also very much in demand as a keynote speaker, and he has taught leadership courses in major universities and previously managed training at one of the largest healthcare systems in the United States. So Joe, welcome.
Oh, Jill, I'm so excited to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining. First of all, I'm very excited about your book. I know what it's like to bring a book forth, and I love your focus. So it comes out next month, yes?
Yep, it comes out on May 9th, and it can actually be pre-ordered anywhere now.
Wonderful. Very good. Well, it's so exciting to have a book out, especially on a topic that is so timely. Every time I go into a practice or talk to a leader, the number one thing on their mind is staffing and how to find people and how to retain them. So that's big issue for our leaders. So let's jump in, because you and I have been talking, and the podcast focus here for physicians is really about financial performance. So, and I can draw a pretty straight line, but I'd love to hear from you. How does improving employee retention impact an organization financially?
No, it's a great question, because there are a lot of invisible costs associated with turnover, right? That we don't necessarily see on a balance sheet when we do the financial analysis for an organization. The truth is that if we are unable to keep talent, we end up spending a lot of resources on the churn that creates, right? The time that it takes to retrain people, the time that it takes to recruit new people, even the costs associated with posting and advertising a position, even the hours that it takes a practice manager, for example, to manage a search and to do interviews, the extra time that established employees are spending picking up additional work or now having to mentor new people who don't fully understand what they're doing yet. There's a reason that research tells us it costs an employer between 1 and 1.5 times a position's salary to replace that position. And then you could even go sort of in a more indirect way, Jill. When you have a lot of churn in an organization, you typically see lower quality, lower patient experience. You don't have established relationships with your patient population. And so things like patient satisfaction scores are impacted, which means that your census or your traffic is going to be influenced. Your reimbursements are going to be influenced. So across the board, it is financially advantageous to keep good people.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't stress that more. Everything you just said is, I think, what gives managers and administrators a lot of angst
Yes.
about the turnover. And the training is spot on, and the invisible costs are really spot on. And I remember the first time I heard that statistic, thinking there's no way that it could cost that much. And then you really do start to think about it. And to your point, there's no way to quantify the loss of those relationships that your staff create with the patients and the value that creates when that patient walks in and sees a familiar face.
No question.
Yeah, absolutely. So along those lines, what do you think are the top 3 most important things leaders in medical practices can do in relation to their team?
Well, so I've spent more than 15 years teaching leaders how to be better bosses and how to create the conditions at work that lead people to thrive. And there's a lot of psychology around this. There's a lot of social science research around what activates people at work, what leads them to join an organization, stay long term, and give it all they've got when they come to work each and every day. And so this book was really a marrying together of a lot of that insight with this moment that we're in right now in a quote unquote post-COVID world, right? Yeah. And so in addition to pulling from a lot of that social science research, we analyzed more than 200 research studies and articles on why people quit a job or take a new job since the global pandemic. And we can say with conviction that commitment and retention appear in an organization when employees get 3 specific experiences. We call them ideal job, meaningful work, and great boss. When I'm in my ideal job, my job fits into my life like a puzzle piece snapping into place. When I experience meaningful work, then that work is fulfilling in a way that activates my commitment. And when I have a great boss, we know that the boss is the single most influential factor in the employee experience. And so all 3 of those experiences work together to supercharge commitment and retention. And we can get into some more detail about what each of those 3 experiences look like because there are dimensions to them. But in a way, it almost sounds falsely reductive, doesn't it? That just getting those 3 things right will actually make it easier to find and keep devoted employees. But what's clear as day is that that's actually true.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's the old adage, people don't quit companies, they quit people. They quit the boss.
That's right. Yeah, that's why that great boss is one of those factors. Yep, 75% of people who leave a job indicate their boss is part or all of the reason why.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's amazingly simple, like you say, almost feels reductive. I like to think of it as the easy button. It's a very right. Important thing, and it's easy. It's easy to get it right. It takes some focus for certain, but I really like how you've got that distilled. And it strikes me there's so much opportunity in healthcare for there to be meaningful work. So many of the people I've had the privilege of working with over the years, physicians, leaders, staff, everyone, are there because healthcare is a little more of a calling than it is a job for most. So I love that about the industry and about working with people in healthcare. That's what's kept me in it for more than 30 years. So
right. Well, each of those 3 factors of ideal job, meaningful work, and great boss has dimensions to them. And you just landed on one of the dimensions of meaningful work, which is what we call purpose, right? This idea that when I believe that my work matters, that I make a difference in the lives of others, that my work is valued by somebody else, that enhances our commitment. The other 2 dimensions to meaningful work are what we call strengths and belonging. So do I have purpose, right? Do I believe my work matters? Does my work align with my strengths? Does my job role take advantage of my unique talents and gifts? And then the third dimension is belonging, right? Am I an accepted and celebrated member of a team? And everybody listening to this podcast, Jill, knows someone or has had the experience of saying, you know what? I don't think I want to take that new job because I really like the people I work with, or this place really accepts me for who I am. And so those are the three dimensions of meaningful work: purpose, strengths, and belonging. And you're right. In healthcare, some of that's kind of organic, and some of that we have to work for.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of it's built in. I am just getting ready to do a podcast about showing appreciation. So that's big on my mind. I'm glad you brought up celebration. What kinds of things have you seen healthcare entities do to celebrate their teams?
Yeah, the idea of recognition is such a crucial ingredient to facilitating meaningful work. What we know, though, what the research tells us is that about 80% of the time, the recognition that employees get is based on tenure. It's based on time, right? It's a 1-year anniversary or a 5-year anniversary or a 10-year anniversary. And those kinds of programs have their place, but they really don't create the psychological effects that lead to meaningful work because you're only celebrating that the person is there. Right? I think in the book, I make a comment that it's really no different than celebrating that the coffee maker is still in the staff lounge, still there doing its thing.
Yeah.
When what we really need to do if to make recognition work is celebrate people's contributions. And those contributions can be outcomes, but they can also just be effort, right? It's important to celebrate and recognize the front desk person who de-escalated that agitated customer.
Yes.
But it's equally important to celebrate the back office person who spent 3 hours doing compliance paperwork or accreditation paperwork that just goes unseen and that's tedious, right? But they did it with an attention on quality and they did it with a commitment to doing a good job. And so bringing those kinds of things into the light and celebrating the effort that people put in is a really powerful way to engage in recognition. And so what we have to advise leaders to do is just go a little farther with your praise, right? It's great to say thank you. If you're walking out of your clinic at the end of a busy day and you turn to somebody and you say, hey, I know it was a tough day today. Thanks so much. Okay, that's a good start. But if we can go just a little step further and say, hey, I know it was a tough day today, and I know that you were overrun, I know we were short-staffed, but I noticed that you still got up from behind the counter, and every single time we had an elderly patient who was getting ready to leave, you helped them put their coat on. And that's amazing, and nobody's ever told you to do that, but I noticed it, and I just wanted to thank you for it. That specificity is like steroids for our commitment when we know that people are noticing our effort.
Absolutely. Well, that's great encouragement for our physician audience. Their words and their praise carry a lot of weight, and they might not realize that. But even, think about what would you put in a chart note if that employee were a patient of yours? Be that specific.
Yes.
And I love your example, and I love calling out things that are a little bit invisible, like compliance work. And, maybe they were filling out quality reports, things that aren't necessarily witnessed by everybody else on the team, but they really do have a positive impact. And that may be something our physician listeners could chat with their administrators about a little bit to say, tell me the invisible work. Tell me who we should thank for the invisible.
And, I've been in healthcare a long time, Jill, almost 20 years. And I know we have some leaders out there who say, I don't have time for that, or I shouldn't have to do that, right? Because I'm giving them a paycheck and that's my thanks. Yeah. And my answer to that is just stop. People aren't robots. People need encouragement. People have a complex set of emotional and psychological demands, just as you do. They have a lot of demands on their time and attention outside of work as well. And so coming into work and facing down every single day the many, many challenges that come with working in a healthcare environment does require them to, from time to time, get their psychological fuel tank refueled. And that comes from the people in power, like our physicians, like our managers, our administrators, taking a moment to say, I see you, you're doing a great job, thank you for that.
Absolutely. Well, and the paycheck comment, I mean, they could just as easily go get a paycheck from McDonald's,
That's right.
yeah. So what differentiates your clinic? So
Right.
it is easy to fall into that trap if you're feeling busy and overwhelmed as a leader. All of our leaders need to get their psychological fuel tanks refilled too.
Yep.
That's another piece. So what kind of you're a longtime veteran of healthcare. What kind of challenges do you see in healthcare specifically as an industry?
Yeah, so it's kind of a reckoning with wages and compensation right now is a big one. And so that first factor we talked about of ideal job, what is my ideal job? Well, that has three factors to it as well. Compensation, flexibility, and workload, right? When my compensation is generous, my workload is manageable, and I get some flexibility around when, where, and how I work, that job fits into my life like a puzzle piece snapping into place. And so my commitment goes up, my loyalty goes up, retention goes up. And so many healthcare organizations right now are wrestling with how do we increase wages at a time when everything is costing us more, right? Our benefits are costing us more. Our revenues are down. Our reimbursements are down. Our costs are up with inflation. And if I can be candid, the people on your team don't care about any of that. What they know is that their wages in most places haven't moved in nearly 40 years if you're in the bottom half of the socioeconomic ladder. Yeah. And if you are trying to raise a family and with inflation and being what it is and what costs of living are these days, the reality is if you can't grow your salary, you may have to go across the street for an extra $1.50 more an hour, even if you love the place you work and people treat you well. And so this kind of wages reckoning is a big issue for a lot of practices. I can tell you that for the organizations that we see increasing or growing wages for employees, they're getting it from one of three places. They're taking it from owner profits, executive salaries, or new and expanded revenue streams. That's really it. And so the organizations who are not struggling to find and keep devoted employees are the organizations who are innovating in those areas to try to move monies around, who are willing to even sacrifice in some areas of executive compensation and profit to push some of those monies down to frontline workers in an effort to retain talent. That's a big part of what's happening right now. And it's not an easy answer. It's not an easy fix. And it's something that practice leaders and hospitals are going to wrestle with for years to come.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. The clients we work with who are doing, anywhere from 5 to 27% year over year increases in compensation for staff are really the leaders and the practice owners that are doubling down on that investment are the ones that are really having some success with retention. And not that it's all about money, because you've listed several other important criteria. When you and I were talking earlier, you mentioned a database from MIT about wages. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the business imperative, which we've talked about, right? About retaining talent and growing wages. But there's a moral imperative here too. And it requires an understanding of what is called a living wage. So for those who aren't familiar with the term, a living wage isn't the minimum wage and it's not market wages. A living wage is an economic calculation of what somebody needs to earn to avoid a substandard of living. And so you can go online to livingwage.mit.edu, where there is a free living wage calculator, and you can find out what the living wage is down to every county in the United States. And the living wage calculator takes a number of costs and factors into its formula. But you can go on there right now and figure out what's the minimum that somebody needs to earn if they live here in order to not struggle with housing, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, medicine, healthcare, childcare. And I can tell you, Jill, that in most counties in the United States, a living wage right now is above $17 an hour. But here's the startling reality. That's for a household of one.
Yes.
If you add a child to that household, the living wage in the U.S. is above $30 an hour in most places, which means that if your hospital or your practice right now has employees who have children at home and they are earning less than $30 an hour, there is a chance they are struggling to meet their basic human needs. And so this is a conversation that we have to have. And it is because for folks in the bottom half of earners here in the US, there has been no salary growth for 40 years, but there has been inflation growth. There has been cost of living growth. The first time in 40 years that we saw wages increase in the United States for people in the bottom half of the socioeconomic ladder was last year. Yeah. Because after years of organizations saying, we can't afford to pay you more, we won't make it, workers are finally turning around and saying, I have to leave because I can't make it. Yeah. And we're seeing places like Target, for example, who has just raised their minimum wage for workers to as much as $24 an hour in some places. Yeah. Yeah. Which, do we want to ask ourselves the question, do we expect that our team members in a healthcare setting are being asked to do more sophisticated work than someone working at Target? I think in a lot of cases, the answer is yes. When you think about the compassion that people need to bring to their interactions and the medical specialty and technology and knowledge that they need to understand. And that's not a knock on working at Target. Have you ever been in a Target in December? That is a tough job.
It's a really tough environment.
But it's just an understanding that the ranges have moved. And so if you're running a business, this is a business imperative and it's a moral imperative. If you can't start to grow wages for people, you will not keep people.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things we review in our physician leadership project is to share with the physicians that they frequently are in conversation about taking care of patients with Medicaid coverage. Mm-hmm. And I will remind them that $17 to $18 an hour is right around the federal poverty level. Yep. And that's right around, folks that could qualify for Medicaid. So when you're paying your front office or your medical assisting staff at that level, that's, to be aware of what you're paying as an employer and really to look at that living wage. And I have to thank you for that reference. We have always, as a company, had a living wage for all of our revenue cycle folks, below which I refuse to pay. And wasn't with the benefit of that lovely database from MIT, but after the conversation you and I had about that, I took that to our leadership team, and we are in the process of reviewing every single one of our employees based on their situation, because as you mentioned, the table includes, are you married? Are you single, head of household, single parent? What's your situation? And really taking a hard look at where all of our employees are. We have them all over the country, but that's a very, very helpful database. And I thank you for just speaking that into my thinking, because we took it right to the group and we're doing a big review. So,
well, and it sort of showcases what's happening at the moment in the labor market, which is we really want the story to be that the problem is workers, that workers don't want to work or that they expect too much with money. When the truth is that no, workers really do want to work. They just need to make a living wage, and they can't afford to not make a living wage. So if they're not working for you, it's because they can't afford to work for you. So we got to turn the mirror inward and fix that problem. And there's a sort of values alignment that has to come with that, right? I get it. I'm a small business owner. I have 4 full-time employees. And we made the commitment a couple of years ago that we would not create a full-time position with a salary of less than $60,000 a year, because you can't live on less than $60,000 a year in the United States anymore unless you have a partner also earning a full-time salary somewhere. And that is hard. I mean, that really requires us to say, what do we need to change about how we run this business and how we collect revenue and how we pay ourselves, how I pay myself, in order to make that a reality and make that commitment to a more humane employee experience a part of how we operate. But that's what you're seeing in a lot of organizations. They're raising the floor in order to treat people better, which then translates into some reciprocity around loyalty and commitment.
Yes, absolutely. And my experience over the years has been paying more gets you a whole lot more retention, which, as we said at the top of the conversation, is a lot less expensive. And just in terms of having the day run smoothly, people who have been with you for a long time know what you're about. Doesn't mean every day is going to be perfect, but it certainly means you're going to have a more smooth operation all the way around, which as you grow, may allow you to work with slightly fewer people if it's a well-oiled machine, and not to say to try to cram a whole lot more work into an individual job, but rather when you see a high-performing team, they really can move through a lot of work. They can do it efficiently. It looks effortless. Yeah. And I think actually for most people, the experience is they're in the zone, and it really is an easier work day when you have a high-performing team that all know each other and have worked together for quite a while.
No question. Yeah. It can be a bit of a double-edged sword, though, because if we operate at a minimum staffing threshold, we actually rob ourselves of the ability to give our teams a more manageable workload and more flexibility, right? Because as soon as somebody calls off or somebody gets sick or wants to go take a couple of days off, everybody else becomes overrun. Yeah. So it's almost a better financial commitment, not just to increase around salary, but to maybe have that one extra person so that you can disperse the workload more evenly across people so that, maybe instead of me having to operate at 100% capacity 100% of the time, I'm operating at 80% of capacity 80% of the time. And so the other 20% of the time, when I'm asked to give 100% because somebody is out, I'm able to do that. And that's the interesting psychology around this show. We know that wages, for example, have very little to do with effort. Wages and benefits are about join and stay. If you want people to join your organization and stay in your organization, you've got to get money right. But when it comes to effort, when it comes to care and try, we actually have to create a whole other set of experiences like some of what we've talked about around purpose and strengths and belonging, etc. There is one exception to that rule, though. It does appear in the social science research that generous pay ramps up effort. So what does generous pay mean? Well, that's kind of a question mark. What we know is that pay is the generosity of pay sort of exists on a continuum, right? And the more generous we are with pay, the more people are likely to feel uncomfortable by getting something they didn't earn. So people by their nature are not necessarily givers or takers, they're matchers. So we quote Wharton School professor Adam Grant in the book, who talks about this at length on his podcast, that people are uncomfortable with the idea of getting something that they didn't necessarily earn, right? That we want to match. So when we get really generous pay, it's human nature to want to match it with generous levels of commitment and effort. And so in that way, if we want pay to translate into more effort, that pay has to be high on the generosity scale. Maybe that means you're top of market. Maybe that means you are paying more than anybody else could get anywhere else in order to do the roles that you are asking them to do. But it's an interesting psychological angle to explore when it comes to thinking about how to tie pay to effort.
Absolutely. That's a great notion. One of the things we recommend on the podcast is that our physician listeners and their dyad partners do some real research in the market to understand what the wage ranges are in their particular market, and also to understand who they're competing with. And our audience, I believe, is mostly private practice, although we have physicians from kind of all walks. But to think about as a private practice, if you are competing in the same hiring pool with the hospital or the health system, you're not likely to be able to compete with them on wage unless you make a real change in how you look at that and looking at it as an investment in staff rather than as an expense line item on your profit and loss. So
right. Well, and it's an investment in a competitive advantage, right? If you are creating some of the conditions that we outline in this book, that ideal job, that meaningful work, that great boss. First of all, you become impenetrable to poaching. No other organization is going to be able to swoop in and steal your MAs or steal your surgery schedulers, et cetera, because of pay or benefits or flexibility if you're already giving them a little bit beyond what they can get nearly anywhere else. Yeah. The second thing that happens is you do get that higher level of effort and that commitment. When people look around and say, man, this job, it's my ideal job. It fits into my life. The work is really meaningful and fulfilling. And I've got a great boss. They want to try harder. They want to give more effort. This is the psychology of employee engagement. And so when commitment goes up, every metric you care about in your organization goes up. Safety, quality, customer experience, patient experience, revenue, reputation, it all goes up. So this idea of giving people their ideal job, doing meaningful work for a great boss, what we call a more humane employee experience, it sounds soft. It sounds squishy, but it's not. It's a business imperative. It's the entry fee for success in a post-COVID world.
Love that. It echoes so many of the things we talk about as a leadership team, and many of the things that we talk about with our physician clients. And
right.
As we said before the podcast, one of the reasons for this podcast is our educational system currently doesn't give physicians any business education whatsoever, including this really important part about the human resource in every practice. And really, my humble opinion, what drives the whole thing is the team supporting the clinicians who are providing the care. So, I mean, and the team is really engaged in providing that care too. So it becomes very important. And I have to agree, what we see time and time again are, obviously there's a huge dichotomy in any medical practice, right? Where you've got very, very well-educated, talented people who are very highly compensated. And then you have people on the team who are at the opposite end of the spectrum, very entry level. And the practices that I see thriving are the ones that don't treat those people like entry level people. They're
and you just hit the nail on the head in something that we talk about in the book, which is that you have to come to believe that the absence of these conditions is inhumane. You have to come to believe that when somebody doesn't earn enough pay to make ends meet, when their workload isn't manageable, when they don't experience belonging or purpose, or they don't have a great boss, you have to come to believe that those things are a violation, that they are wrong. Only then do we start to see a culture shift where you create the kind of employee experience that people want to be a part of. And as part of that, Jill, it requires us to believe that every single person on our team has worth and deserves to see their job as their dream job, right? Regardless of station, regardless of education. And so I'm reminded of an interaction I had a couple of years ago when I was keynoting at a conference. An administrator came up to me and she said, "I'm really frustrated." She said, "We run a very large multi-site practice. We have 20 physicians. They all make more than $750,000 a year. And I don't begrudge them a cent of that. They have the hardest jobs on the planet. They've earned every penny. They've put in the work. They got the education. But we're struggling to retain our downstream boots on the ground talent and fill positions. And as we were brainstorming ideas, I told them I could solve our wages issue if every doctor in the practice were to reduce their salary by $10,000. To take all 20 of those physicians, move them from $750 a year to $740 a year. That would create the pool of money needed to raise wages across the specific position group they were struggling with retention around. And it was immediately voted down almost unanimously across the practice. And I know that it is tough to consider giving up our own prosperity. But what we know is that when we have a commitment to ensuring that we are not the only prosperous folks in our workplace, that actually supercharges loyalty. So if we can push some of that prosperity down the org chart a little bit, retention becomes easier, training becomes easier, commitment grows. It's all a part of that formula.
And it all floats up, and the prosperity floats right back up the org chart.
It floats right back up, absolutely.
Get that right, yeah. I had almost that identical conversation with the administrator of one of our clients about 2 months ago. And it's interesting. So that let's take that conversation and run with it a little bit, because that's good math. So if the physicians in that group or in any group were to invest the $10,000 into increasing compensation, my supposition is that they would see 2, 3, 4x return on that money in pretty short order, meaning, as you've been saying, increasing those wages, getting us to a humane place, getting the employees out of the paycheck to paycheck, and which creates chaos. I mean, really, and I've heard that from many clients. Our frontline staff seem to have chaotic lives. And if we
Yes,
stop and think about that for a minute, probably a big part of that chaos is just their economics and where they're
absolutely.
sitting with their life right now. So if they were to
Well, and
make,
you know what? Let me mention something about that,
yeah,
because we have some interviews in the book when we talk about wages, and we talk about that the stress and the circumstances that financial or economic distress create. And the truth is that when we insist on suppressing wages in the way that they have been for years, we are perpetuating the material conditions that lead to the chaos that you're describing. The
yeah,
inability to afford childcare, the inability to cook healthy meals, the inability to afford stable housing, the inability to take a sick day or to take my family on vacation so that we can be restored and reduce our stress. All of those things go out the window when I can't afford to just make ends meet at work.
yeah.
And at the heart of that, though, I come back to this idea of worth. I had a conversation at another event not that long ago. I think it was 2 years ago. The pandemic was sort of finally starting to exit a little bit. We were sort of opening back up again. And I had a physician and an administrator come up to me after the event, and they said, "Can you settle a debate for us?" I said, "Maybe, I'm not sure."
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, we're really struggling to get people to apply to our open medical assistant and frontline clinical positions. We think we need to raise wages, but we're debating where to go." Now, the administrator is saying all of this, and the physician is saying nothing. And she said, "You know, what do you think we should pay?" And I said, "That's a really hard question for me to answer. What have you learned about what everybody else is paying?"
Yeah.
And in the state that they were in, pretty populated state, said, "We're seeing it's about $20 an hour everywhere. And we know we need to go up above that, but we're trying to find the sweet spot."
Yeah.
And this was a specialty practice. There was, it was a very difficult environment to work. It was oncology. I'll be upfront about that. It was an oncology practice. So you need a sort of extra layer of knowledge and emotional compassion, right, in the work that we do. And I said, "Well, I don't know how many places you're seeing that are at the $25 an hour range, but I would imagine if you could get there, you would stand out among people who do that kind of work." And immediately the physician's face just twisted and he gasped and he said, "Are you kidding me? There's not an MA alive worth $25 an hour." And he stormed out.
Oh my. Okay.
And it, just this idea of not treating people as a commodity, but treating them as fully formed human beings, and understanding that if you want me to come and bring experience working in an oncology clinic and being there for your patients in that way and being able to pay my bills, no, it's not unheard of that I need to make $25 an hour, because now I can go make 24 at Target.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And mid-20s in a lot of places that don't require you to work with sick patients who come in and see us when they're not at their best and they don't bring their best behavior sometimes. And as a frontline person, you're expected to kind of weather all of that. And also weathering the emotional impact, especially in an oncology practice of, you're going to have relationships.
You have to learn how to navigate death.
Exactly.
And a lot of times young death. And that is a very profoundly challenging set of circumstances, especially for frontline staff, maybe who are a little less educated and who actually end up touching it more sometimes than providers.
And are a little less prepared for it.
Right.
Yeah. That's an excellent thought about worth and how you look at positions. I frequently will remind our clients, and just to break down the math, to say if you pay a staff person, if you give them a raise for $1 an hour, that costs you a whopping $173 a month. And that, I think sometimes when I phrase it that way too, it's we'll have people pausing and saying, okay. And if $1 or $2 an hour will help us to retain that person that's familiar with our practice and our patients, what a lovely investment to make. In the practice and really kind of in your sanity, in your day going well as the physician. No question. I've heard so many times people say, when Sally is working, the day just goes smoothly. And it's like, great, what are you doing for Sally? Have you sent her flowers recently? Have you taken her out for lunch? Have you given her a gift card so, she could go out to a nice dinner somewhere? What is it that you're doing to really see her and appreciate her? Yeah.
And there's another piece to this, which really comes down to supply and demand, right? There's an argument that's being made right now that's not rooted in any kind of reality. And it's this notion that, well, people don't want to work. And that the problem is a work ethic, right? I can't find good people. No one wants to work. Listen, unemployment is at record lows. There have only been 3 months in the last 50 years when it is lower than it is right now. Wow. And we are adding about 14,000 jobs a day to the U.S. economy, on top of the 10 million open jobs that there are already. I saw a Chamber of Commerce report recently that said if you took every unemployed person in the United States right now and you put them in a job, there would still be 5 million empty jobs tomorrow. There just aren't enough people to do all of the jobs that we have in our economy. And the biggest shortages, Jill, I know you know this, are going to be in leisure and hospitality, management positions, labor positions, education, and healthcare. Yeah. And so I've been telling leaders across the country, we need to embrace a mindset shift. It's not that nobody wants to work. It's that nobody wants to work for you. If they can't afford to, if the circumstances aren't right, the mindset shift we have to embrace is not that there's a staffing shortage. It's that there's a great job shortage. The employers who are providing great jobs aren't struggling to fill those positions. Yes. They have figured out that what people want is a better quality of life. Yep. All the job switching that we're seeing right now at record levels, there are record levels of people who are leaving their current job to take better jobs. They are looking for an upgrade to their quality of life. And for some people, that's an upgrade in pay, but for some people, that's an upgrade in commute or schedule or more fulfilling work or a less toxic environment or a better boss or a better benefits package. Yeah. But across the board, it's about better quality of life. And so that's really why we wrote this book, was to create a framework, a blueprint for what that looks like. And that's why we come back to these notions of ideal job, meaningful work, and great boss. That's the formula for a great job. When you create that for the people on your team, or you make it clear that that's what you're going to get if you join my team, it becomes a lot easier to find and keep devoted people.
Absolutely. Well, the law of supply and demand will dictate that if there really are not enough, there are more jobs than there are people out there to do them right now, then people will look to upgrade. And so that's a great question for our audience to ponder is, are you a destination workplace or are you a stopover? And are the people on your team just biding their time until they can find something better? Or have they looked around and said, wow, this place rocks. I'm going to stay here for a while. I love it here.
And they're looking, right? And we see consistently research telling us that 50% of workers in the U.S. workforce are interested in changing jobs in the next 12 months. And then just last week, Monster.com came out with this big research finding. And this is stunning, Jill. 98% of employees will at least once go online and look for open positions outside of their current employer. Wow. People are lifting their head up and they're looking around for an upgrade. If you had to ask yourself, have I created the kind of experience that's going to make every one of my employees choose me over every other opportunity out there? Then you're probably doing okay. If that question gives you pause, then you probably have work to do.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Well, I can't thank you enough, Joe. What a phenomenal conversation this has been. I so appreciate your dedication to healthcare and your dedication to helping people be better bosses. And I will once again say how excited I am. I have my copy of Employalty on pre-order from Amazon, and I can't wait for release day, and encourage our listeners to hop on. You can order the book ahead of time so that you get it the minute it comes out. And I think for all of us, again, such an imperative to create the workplace where people want to be. So thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, Jill, for having me. I love the conversation. Thanks again for the invite.
All right. Thank you. You can find more information online at medicalmoneymatterspodcast.com, and you can subscribe to the Medical Money Matters content website for physician leaders to find budget templates and many other tools. We've included those links in the show notes. As I like to close out these podcasts, congratulations on taking the next step in your professional development and for making the commitment to learn about the financial and business aspects of your practice. I look forward to being on this journey with you and send you my heartfelt gratitude for all that you do for your patients all day, every day.